All right, Planning and Zoning Commission for the City of Granbury will now come to order at 6 p.m. on Monday, February 12, 2024, Granbury City Hall, City Council Chambers. The first item on the agenda tonight is public comments on agenda items that are non-public hearing items. Do we have anyone that speaked or signed up to speak? If not, we'll move to item C, the consent agenda. Consider approving Planning and Zoning Commission's meeting minutes from January the 8th, 2023. These are the regular meeting minutes. Have any changes or corrections? Is this on? Because it doesn't sound like it. Okay. Do any changes or corrections? If not, I'll entertain a motion to approve as presented.
Motion to approve minutes as presented.
I have a motion by Mr. Hallman to approve the minutes as presented. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Haves. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. The next item on the agenda is D, items for discussion. D1, presentation related to zoning ordinance amendment proposal related to landscaping provisions. Kira?
Thank you. We have our consultant, Craig Farmer, here. Mr. Farmer will be presenting the item for you, and we'll look after any questions you might have. Craig?
It's got to be smarter than the equipment sometimes. Anyway, so I'm here tonight on the landscaping requirements. I know everybody's been waiting quite a while for these. The changes. To start off with, we are taking the entire Chapter 8 and Chapter 13 out of the zoning ordinance and move it into buildings over in Chapter 3, okay? So we're creating a brand new section, Article 3.22, Landscape Requirements. There's 2 or 3 reasons for this. One is that zoning, anything in the zoning ordinance is very difficult to amend, and the legislature's actually made it a little more tougher even to amend them, even if you're trying to clean it up and make things work better. The notice requirements, putting in the newspaper, and those sorts of things. So zoning requirements tend to be written in stone or perceived that way. When you put it over there in the building chapter, it's more like the building codes and other things, and it's much simpler to amend. You don't have to put notice in the newspaper. You'll still want to have a public meeting and go over the changes, but it makes it a lot simpler to keep up with what's going on in the industry. So does everybody have the document in front of them? Our plan today is to walk you through here. If you try to go into, I'll put my pen down, pardon me. Sorry about that. The plan is to go through and hit the highlights. Part of the problem with your current landscaping regulations is you had a Chapter 3 in the zoning ordinance, and then later on you adopted Chapter 13 for tree preservation, and they're 2 totally separate ordinances, and they conflict with each other at times, and they're also very complicated. So in the moving it over into this Article 3, we substantially shortened it just by eliminating a lot of duplication. We sorted out all the conflicting provisions, and we finally reordered it and put it into a sequence that makes more sense. And if you see anything in here in the way of the sequence or the flow of the ordinance, please let us know where it doesn't feel quite right. It's something's a little bit out of order. Purpose section, that's pretty straightforward. 3.22, compliance required. We've added a few things here. The old one said anytime you had a change in zoning, you had to comply with the landscaping requirement. Well, we changed that to say a change in zoning on property that has existing structures to be utilized for the new use. So if it was a non-conforming use or something like that, it was exempted. Also under C, we've added this 25%, same thing with D and some of the others. We've said if you're going to add up to 25% to the building footprint, you don't have to, if it's less than 25% of the building footprint, you don't have to comply with the landscaping provisions. Now, there's another section we've created that you didn't even have before, which is non-conforming landscaping. The old ordinance said, if you're not conforming to landscaping, you just follow the non-conforming rules in zoning. Well, the non-conforming rules in zoning deal with buildings and uses. They don't talk about landscaping, so it really didn't address the issue. So there's a lot of confusion about what triggered, if you were going to take over a building, did it trigger having to comply with the landscaping ordinance? And we'll talk about that some more in a little bit. But that was one of the big problems, was it was triggering it when you really weren't having much of a change in the building or the land use there at that location. We added administrative modifications. There's a whole section in here, 3.22.3.
Hey, Craig,
yes, ma'am.
can you tell us what sections you're on and what page numbers or something? Page 7?
Yes, ma'am. 3.22.3 is on page 7. I apologize. I can do that. Not a problem. Their waiver or administrative modification of requirements. This is basically a new section that gives the director authority to modify or amend landscaping, much similar to what we did in the plating ordinance, where the director can reduce the number of trees by 10%, amount of landscaping to give more flexibility where there's a problem. There is some criteria in there where they can do it, and obviously the appeal is to the city manager and then to the city council. So we think that's going to really help on a lot of the problems that have been showing up, especially again on retrofitting existing buildings and structures and things. Number 2 there is new. And this is addressing xeriscape and other things similar to it. When we get to the definitions section, we've added a bunch of definitions. One of them in particular is xeriscape. There was a real interest in how to deal with xeriscape. So we came up with this section here. It starts on bottom page 7 there. 2, administrative approval of alternative landscaping and methods. This is a fairly typical way of handling construction and things like that. So we're using a similar process where the director of community development or the building official, because quite often the building official is looking at the plans and they don't even get to the director of community development. They can approve an alternative landscaping material or method of installation, including the use of artificial plants or turf, not otherwise covered in this ordinance, provided it is a generally accepted alternative material or method, or it has to be in accordance with the manufacturer's specifications and meet the industry standards. So one of the issues was, can you put AstroTurf in or something like that for a yard? This would be a specific approval by the director of community development of the building official to allow you to do that. They would look at it. You just can't go to Home Depot and buy some AstroTurf and lay it across the dirt. You'd have to use the approved technique to install it, which is usually lay down a bed of sand, put the borders and those sorts of things in. So this is intended to help with alternative landscaping materials or methods, as long as it's a typical method that's utilized in the industry. And then finally, if you want more waiver, more than the 10% that the director can grant, or you want to appeal a decision about this alternative method, that would go to the city manager and then to the city council. So does that all make sense? Okay. That takes us to definitions. We've added a few definitions. The building official wasn't defined, director of community development wasn't defined. A big issue in the old ordinance was they measured the circumference or diameter of the tree at about 8 different ways, including in a couple spots it was a foot off the ground, which makes no sense whatsoever. It's an industry standard, this diameter breast height, DBH, which is 4.5 feet off the ground. I actually had to ask why 4.5 feet, and that is the industry standard. So we've standardized that throughout the document. Then there's some places in the ordinance where they talk about evapotranspiration, ET controllers, and other things. We actually define those. The evapotranspiration, ET controllers, they're on page 9. Those are and there's 3 different ways at the top of 10 that you can do it. Most typically, it's done by a more sophisticated on-site weather measurement, keeps track of rain and the humidity and things to trigger the sprinkler systems and those sorts of things. And there's some credits later on, so you got a 2% credit if you use this technique, but nobody knew what it was. We've defined that technique. Alternative irrigation is the same thing, because again, there's some credits if you do alternative irrigation, looking at, and drip irrigation was another one we've defined in here. All of these are looking at water conservation, which is turning into a big issue. Rainwater harvesting was also mentioned in the ordinance. We've now defined that and found an industry definition. Moving on to page 11, xeriscape is defined. We found an industry definition. Zeroscaping, I was surprised because I thought I was the only person that ever said that, because I got it wrong sometimes trying to reference xeriscape. Xeroscaping is a term that is used in the landscaping industry, which is just putting down gravel or mulch or rocks with no plant materials or very limited plant materials. Later on, we say that xeroscaping is prohibited, but xeriscape is allowed and lists those conditions. The landscaping required, and I've left a few places in here with the highlighted changes because they're, in my opinion, pretty significant. Your current ordinance doesn't differentiate between the districts. It just says every place has to do 20% landscaping. We have since adjusted that in residential areas, excluding the patio home and townhome districts. We've said it's 20% still, and that includes your multifamily. Retail or commercial areas, we're suggesting a reduction to 10%. And industrial and manufacturing areas, we've suggested a reduction not only to 10%, but it's 10% of the area in front of the buildings along the roadway. If you've had to administer these ordinances or work with industries, it's very awkward trying to landscape the back where they're keeping the bulldozers and things. So this is where you can see it. You're required to landscape it.
I have a question on that.
Yes, sir.
From 20 to 10%, give me an example. Let's say HEB versus Kroger. What's it going to look like with reduced from 20 to 10?
Well, it's difficult because this is one of the issues with your existing ordinance. Some ordinances set a real high square footage, and then they give you credits for doing just about anything to reduce that. Some ordinances just say you've got to have this many trees and this percentage of landscaping, period. We've transitioned somewhat in this ordinance to a lower square footage requirement, but we've eliminated a lot of the credits for some of the things. I'll give you an example. There was actually a provision for you got credits for the landscaped area under a bush or a shrub applied against that. Well, that didn't make any sense. I mean, you know, it's all just part of the landscaping. So we'll talk about that in a minute. I'm not sure on the existing projects. We could probably sit down and analyze those projects. Might not be a bad idea because they probably have pretty. I suspect their landscaping plans are probably pretty elaborate. So we can take a look at that and see. We'll make a note of that. Part of the problem with a lot of these sophisticated credit type ordinances, it'd be like having credits for an off-street parking ordinance. The off-street parking ordinance just says minimums. This is the minimum. You got to do it, period. there's some merit, especially when it comes to water conservation, to having incentives and credits. But there's, a lot of the credits were questionable in my opinion, and so that's why we've reduced the total percentage on the one hand, but on the other hand, we've eliminated a lot of the credits that could help reduce that percentage, if that makes sense. I think the Kroger and HB and maybe one or two others, we can beta test it and see what that does. My experience in, one of the things I'm in the process of doing is, and that's why I can say that there are some ordinances that have pretty sophisticated credit systems, is that I'm going through about 10 different cities. We've done it on the use charts too, and taking a look at their requirements and how many trees per 1,000 square feet, what percentage landscaping. And I hope to have that before the next meeting so we can, again, answer that question of what the other cities are doing. It's actually been pretty surprising. Some of the cities I thought were pretty easy are actually pretty tough. Fort Worth is usually pretty well known for having ordinances that are fairly easy to work with, and they actually, in terms of trees, they actually get into how much coverage you have, what's the crown of the trees you're planting, and there's a percentage calculation on that, so it's actually a pretty sophisticated ordinance. So I think a beta test might be a good idea on those. And again, that's a pretty substantial change. That's why I want to be sure and bring it to your attention. And I'll show you later on where we're getting rid of some of the credits that would offset that amount being required. Industrial is a pretty significant change. It's just that we're taking the landscaping that was in the back or on the sides that you couldn't see and asking them to put it in the front. So I think that makes sense. The question came about phasing, and the ordinance does provide for phasing. There's been a couple issues recently about construction and phases and whether they had to meet at all or for the trees and things, and I think this that was the existing language, believe it or not. Number 3 there, ignore the typo, it's still a work in progress. This is some of your existing language. It does require there that you still have to have grass and or ground covers cannot comprise over 80% of any required landscape area. That means 20% of it's going to have to be bushes, shrubs, trees, and those sorts of things, ornamentals. From what I've seen so far, that's a pretty normal number in cities. So there's another provision about the amount in front yards. Yours is 40%. Some cities are even higher than that the amount of landscaping, 80% of it has to be in front of the buildings in one particular city, so that's pretty standard from what I could tell. Again, the amount of landscaping or trees required, number 4 there, 10% reduction, but it talks about where the requirement's excessive. Let's see what else we've got in there. Number 7 there is where it says artificial plants are prohibited. And that's what we changed. Currently, they were prohibited. We've allowed that with that section I referred to, 3.22.3, so it is allowed under special approvals. Number 9, an irrigation system must be provided. That was some of your existing language. We've added to that. A there is new. Single-family residential uses may choose to utilize the installation of hose bibs in lieu of an irrigation system. And I think later on we say it has to be within 100 feet of all areas, which is the maximum length of a hose you can buy, is where that number came from. There was some desire to be able to use hose bibs, but only in single-family, not in multifamily or commercial applications. If you are commercial and you are doing xeriscape, and if it's specifically approved by the Director of Community Development, the building official, you may be able to use hose bibs. In other words, if your plan doesn't use that much water to require an irrigation system, it might work. Any questions on the hose bibs? Faucets? Okay, that's pretty much all new. Before, it just said an irrigation system must be provided, period. That got us into the sites that were developed prior to the adoption of this ordinance. The language in there talks about this is addressing the fact that it doesn't comply with the requirements of this article or the ordinance 189. I believe that was that was if it was a property that was developed before the zoning ordinance was adopted. Okay, it's just laying out a threshold. Anyway, it's talking about not complying, and this section still needs a little bit of work. But we have the non-conforming sections, so we'll be requiring compliance with that, or using that as a standard. The link is not quite. Matter of fact, I need to make a note there. This is your existing language, restructured to some extent. It's still a little bit awkward. 3.22.6 is brand new. Water conservation and zero escape encouraged. So there was a desire to make sure that water conservation is stressed in this ordinance. There's been a number of cities. One I'm very familiar with is the city of Midland. They adopted Dallas-Fort Worth standards in a desert environment for landscaping. And when they had their water problems, it's been a while. The firm I was with at the time, Freese and Nichols, I guess set a record for building about 90 miles of pipeline from a lake to get them water. But in the meantime, they were so low on water you couldn't water anything. I mean, just let it die. And so other cities have gone through the same experience with water conservation. So that first paragraph is kind of a purpose saying the water conservation holds a key in responsibly managing the city of Granbury's available water. By focusing on water conservation, we can make sure there's enough in the future, et cetera, et cetera. And then we go through, and these were pulled together from about 5 different ordinances about zero escape and water conserving plans. So you probably want to look through this section. We've pulled some paragraphs out of the existing ordinance. For example, number 2 there talks about zero escaping credits. And the term zero escape was not used in the existing ordinance, so we're using it more frequently. But the credit towards landscaping requirements, so you can get a credit for zero escaping towards your landscaping requirements. Plus, we point out a little bit later on that it actually saves you money by doing it also. One issue you run into with zero escape is a lot of times it's native plants, and you get crossways with your keep the grass mowed ordinance. You know, the one I found was a 6-inch height limit, and I think yours is a foot, I believe 12 inches. So I have a note there to check on that one. But so a zero escape plant or water conserving plant or turf will not be required to meet the 6-inch height limit requirement for turf grass. So that's something to keep in mind. Number 10, I didn't even know about this. Some people might. The Texas Property Code, Section 202007, as amended, states that restricted covenants and homeowners associations may not enforce or implement, and I've listed everything that's in the statute, but the more important one is the D. They can't keep an individual from using drought-resistant landscaping or water conserving natural turf. So even though the HOA may have requirements for certain kinds of grass and certain kinds of plants, they can't enforce somebody coming in and putting in some drought-resisting landscaping or turf. Either make sure, though, that that doesn't mean you can just go out there and throw down gravel, rocks, or cacti, okay? And that wording is specifically from the statute.
Craig,
Yes, sir.
can I make a comment and express a
Sure.
concern and maybe make a suggestion? Texas Property Code 202.007 does outline, and you've quoted them pretty much exactly as to what the property association or homeowners association cannot prohibit. But my concern is that if someone reads this, they might interpret that the homeowners association doesn't have any regulatory authority whatsoever on those items. And I come from 7 years on Harbor Lakes Homeowners Association, so I'm a little bit sensitive to this. The property code goes on to say in Part D of the code, this section does not restrict a property owners association from regulating the requirements, including size, type, shielding, materials, location, aesthetics, et cetera, and it covers all 4 of those points. I don't think that you'd want to insert the page and a half of the nuances associated with it in the code, but can offer a suggestion that maybe at the
Sure.
end of those points, that maybe there would be a short paragraph that would be introduced that would say something, and this is what I came up with, that might say, note, however, the Texas Property Code Section 202.007, Part D, does not restrict a property owners association from regulating certain materials, visibility, aesthetics, related requirements associated with items A through D above. I can give you a copy of this if.
Yeah, I would love that wording. That would be great.
I'm concerned that if someone reads this, they're going to think that there's no regulatory authority in the HOA, and, perhaps that paragraph would cause them to either go to the code or maybe, heaven forbid, go read the CCRs of their HOA agreement. So at any rate, I just think that would clarify, what that really means.
Well, and you raise a good point, too. The city's not going to be able to tell the HOA they can't enforce or not enforce certain things. I mean, theoretically, they might be able to, I don't know, but my general recommendation to a city is to not do that. But if someone comes in with a landscape plan that's showing these other kinds of materials, the city's probably going to have to issue a permit to install those kinds of materials. Not so much get crossways with the HOA or tell them the HOA can't enforce it. That's for the courts, but the city would probably still have to issue permits, especially on the sprinkler systems and things.
Yeah, 202 and 209 supersede any HOA covenants because the Texas law changes and sometimes CCNRs are old. So they would always supersede if there's anything that violates the Texas code. But it's good to know and to be compliant with.
Well, I didn't even know about it until I found it, searching, so I appreciate that.
Yeah, we certainly don't want people making compost piles in their front yard, so
Yes.
that's why the HOA would have some precedence over that. So,
I had to
thank
laugh
you.
because Denver, my daughter lives in Denver, she's an engineer, believe it or not, and they have prohibited rainwater harvesting in Denver, I guess because it's interrupted, it's a dry area and it interrupts the flow of water, so they don't let you rainwater harvest, from what I understand, so.
So do we even need 10 in there?
Yes, I would highly recommend it, but I can work with your wording and also with the city attorney, I see him back there, to make sure it's clear that this is what's the statute saying, and the city is probably just going to follow the wording when it comes to issuing irrigation plans and those sorts of things of the statute.
Yeah, I think in the context of the rest of section 322, it should be there because, that people do need to know that the HOA doesn't have dominion over them and their ability to implement those features, which the intent here is just to save water, right? So.
But we can do a much better job clarifying as to what the city can enforce, what the city can't enforce. Thank you for all that. The section on location criteria, number one was the one I mentioned before, that no less than 40% of the total landscaping has to be in the front yard. That's about average from the ordinances I looked at. Some are even higher than that. Your map there, that landscaped corridor map, by the way, that's a new map thanks to the Community Development Department, and it's very legible. Currently, you require an additional 15-foot landscaping buffer along those roadways. And this is your current wording. We did not change it. So if anybody, well, I need to change that one thing. Oh, the map moved. That's what happened. The map's in the middle of the paragraph. The map is not below, it's above right now, so we'll fix that. That's why we put a figure number on it, just for your information. The ordinance also talks in terms of trees for every 50 feet of frontage. It clarifies to make sure that the, and that one says caliper canopy tree, which should be DBH. Anyway, to make sure it's located in the front yard, the trees along the roadway. You do require in the zoning ordinance landscape around the monument signs. We left it there, but we referenced that section in zoning. So that brings us to 3.22.8 on the top of page 16. This is some of the information. So some of your landscape area credits, well, for each, remember in the retail and commercial, it was a 20% requirement. We're suggesting getting rid of these because every time you planted a 5-gallon plant, you got 25 square feet of credit to offset the 20%. Same thing for each 6-inch tree you planted. You got a 400 square foot. It was extremely complicated. You know, on the one hand, you had a high number, and on the other hand, then you started throwing all these numbers at it. So we removed all that, or we're recommending removal. We are keeping the credit for keeping a 6-inch or larger tree. Currently, your ordinance is kind of strange. It says you get 800 square feet of credit. Oh, excuse me, I'm thinking of transplanting. I'm sorry, this one is correct the way it's worded. There's a place that talks about transplanting, and it was confusing because you only got credits for a transplanted tree if it was somewhere between 3 inches and 6 inches. So if you happen to get a tree spade and plant an 18-inch tree, you didn't get any credit at all according to the ordinance. So a little confusing. Working our way through it. One point I'm not sure about, we have gone from saying you may landscape the requirement, or you may landscape the right-of-way, to a you shall landscape the right-of-way. And there was a half a square foot of credit in the past for landscaping the right-of-way. Some cities give you a full square foot of credit, and some cities just say you have to do it, and we don't count it towards landscaping. So I've left that one at a half a square foot if anybody has concern on it. Let's see. I don't believe we've got a lot of changes in the next little bit there. I've left highlighted the reductions in required square footage of landscaping. And there's been a concern that these also are confusing. I pointed out that the city, as I understand it and have been told, is interested in conserving water. So I have left these reductions in there as written in your existing ordinance. So 5 and 6 at the bottom of 16 are actually your existing requirements, and I've not removed those. So you can still get credits for those, but you'll be getting credits against that 10% requirement, not the 20% requirement like you had before. Okay. Landscaping within the public right-of-way. Currently, ordinance says the owner or developer may landscape abutting rights-of-way. And as I said, I mean, it wouldn't make sense to have dirt along the right-of-way in front of an apartment complex or a business. So we said you must, and you'll get that half square foot of credit. So that's could be perceived as a significant change, although I don't know too many developer types that would leave it not landscaped. We also, there's a provision, I think a little bit later, that says, maybe it's in this one. No, I'm sorry, number 2 there, we added some language in there. One of the things that's come up is they'll put a sidewalk in, and the parkway will only be about 2 feet wide. My experience is that if a parkway is less than 6 feet, the area between the sidewalk and the curb, if it's less than 6 feet, sprinkler systems start spraying into the street or onto the concrete. So we're saying it has to, if you're going to use sprinkler systems, it's got to be at least 6 feet. If it's less than 6 feet, you got to go to an alternative, perhaps drip irrigation or some other method of irrigating it, so you aren't watering the street. Does that make sense? And we're still running the traps on a few of these things with the Public Works Department and building official and others. We did say that single-family uses must install landscaping on the abutting right-of-way similar to the landscaping on the rest on their property, and the same thing with the sprinkler system. So if they've got hose bibs, they can use the hose bib. If they got a sprinkler system on their property, then the sprinkler system should work on the right-of-way also. The ordinance was very confusing, and apparently one ordinance said you could do it, and one ordinance didn't say you could do it, which was put trees on the right-of-way. We have now said that you can't put trees on the right-of-way unless the Director of Public Works says you can, and TxDOT would have to approve anything on a TxDOT right-of-way. The problem, it's a double-edged sword. If you got utilities in there and other things, planting trees in the right-of-way is an issue, both in terms of if it's the wrong kind of tree, it can break up curves and get into the water lines and things, wastewater lines. However, you've already got a new mixed-use development coming that's going to have some big parkways, and it's got parking lots with head-in parking backing into the street and things, and they've got landscape islands with trees. So, so you don't want to absolutely prohibit it. And in certain conditions, it makes total sense. For example, if you had like it's conceivable someone could put in a development with a 30 or 40 foot right of way with a hike and bike trail and other things, well then it's fine putting in trees and those sorts of things. So we've made it clear that it's not allowed unless it's specifically approved by the Director of Public Works. Any questions on all that? Okay, parking area requirements, which is 322.11. And we have amended, and I think this helps a little bit. We may come back and just fix the drawing totally. On page 19, there's a drawing. So it's a little confusing when the ordinance says you can't have more than 12 parking spaces with without an island, a landscape island. And then it goes on to say that if you have you can't have a maximum of 20 parking spaces, no more than 20 may be provided in one grouping without a landscape island. One of the problems everybody's having was the drawing didn't match the text. So we've added some language there that says, on the far right there on page 19 on the graphic, it says no more than 12 spaces in a row without an island. And then in the middle, I'm sorry, next to that it says no more than 20 spaces in a group without an island. So that 20 spaces there with, it's 2 parking spaces, would be 10 on each side. We've also said that it's more important to have the end caps, the end of the aisles have an island. That helps define, your, where the traffic goes. And some people late at night, including myself, like to go cross-country in parking lots, and that helps you figure out where you're supposed to be versus what's going on when you cheat. Probably a bigger issue was currently those green areas there along the bottom were not counted as landscaping, even though they're bump outs into the parking lot for maneuvering and those sorts of things. So we're recommending, we just struck the word not, and we're saying that should be counted as square footage of landscaping also. And again, I think we'll play with H-E-B and Kroger and see what that does. But almost every parking lot has those in the corners of the parking lots because you can't park cars there because you can't maneuver. It's too close to the drives and those sorts of things. So currently, you have to have one landscaped parking island for each 12 spaces, and you got to have one landscaped island for every 20 parking spaces in the grouping. And the graphic now shows that. Let's see. I think we used the existing language for most of the rest of that. I think, yeah. Okay. So that gets us to section 3.22.12, non-conforming landscaping. Well, before I leave this, there was a question that came up. I guess it was my own question. And I think I know what the answer is to it. Nowhere in that section does it say you have to have a tree in an island, which is a little bit unique. But I think going back to, I believe, under requirements, what page? Is that where it is? Which one? Is it really? SC 4A doesn't say anything about a tree. And the issue came up, but I think I know the answer to the question. Pardon me just a second, I meant to look this up. You have a landscaping requirement. I can do it real quick. The reason this comes up is because apparently a lot of those trees have died. And if it's if it is a required tree in an island and it dies, then the business must replace it. And so there's some question about, is it required, is it a good idea, and those sorts of things. Give me another half second, I'm sorry. So let me check this one place. I don't see it. Yeah, well, we'll have to look some more because currently the gist is you have to provide one tree per island, and I don't see it in the ordinance currently. So either we lost that or it never was required and it was just assumed that it was needed. So we'll clarify that, and I apologize. So any questions on parking lots at this point? Now, one of the big issues that came up from a number of people was in terms of existing parking lots that somebody wants to utilize for a business. They might not even be building a new building. It may just be a change of occupancy. We've added this 3 sections here on page 20. Parking lots with non-conforming landscaping. We more or less took the landscaping rules. You can expand up to 10% of the parking lot without meeting the landscape requirements at all. You can expand up to 50% of the total paved area, and the new paved area has to meet the landscaping requirements. The existing does not. And if you get above 50%, then the entire property's got to comply. And then number E there, the Director of Community Development may reduce the number of trees within a parking lot, or the requirement for trees to be placed within islands on an already paved parking lot. Another issue that's come up is if it's an existing parking lot, it's quite often very expensive to tear up the parking lot, especially concrete ones, to put in an irrigation system to serve new islands. So we've given the Director of Community Development the ability to alter those irrigation requirements. Around the perimeter is not a problem because they can trench that, and any islands around the perimeter wouldn't be a problem, but islands in the parking lot itself are very difficult and expensive to landscape. So 4 is basically the same thing, it's just the use of the land, and 5 is a structure. So if you've got a structure on a parcel that doesn't comply with the landscaping ordinance, and you're going to expand up to 50% of the area's total structure, then you've got to add a similar percentage of landscaping. It's not till you get over 50% do you have to do the 100%. And again, the Director of Community Development can work with that for hardship cases. This was one of the big issues, was people taking over a building for a use, just changing the CO and really not spending a lot of money on it, and then having to comply with the landscaping ordinance. So y'all may want to think about that. And again, we'll take a look. There's a couple of projects that I was made aware of that we'll see how this affects them and what that does. Any questions on that part?
Craig,
Yes, sir.
so in 3E, the Director of Community Development may reduce the number of trees within a parking lot or the requirements for trees to be placed within islands on already paved existing parking areas, which probably suggests that we did somewhere along the way lose
I think so.
some requirement for trees.
I think so. I'm not quite sure what happened, so we'll find that one. And we'll make sure that we'll have the answer anyway when we bring it back. And you don't necessarily want to not have trees in parking lots. Everybody goes, well, why do you want to have trees well, it's the same thing with roundabouts. You put the trees there to identify, it sticks up. And so people driving will know there's something there if there's a tree there. They may drive over, a landscaped island, but if there's a tree or bushes or something in the island, they'll say, oh, wait a minute, there's something there. And so it's a traffic control device as much as anything. Plus, it cools off the parking lots. This is why I think we lost something, because I know for a fact your ordinance said that used car lots and new car lots didn't have to have trees in the parking areas. They could put them on the outside. Reason being is birds sit up there and mess with the cars. So there was a specific exemption for those. So it's in there somewhere. We have temporarily lost it. We'll find that section. All right. Number 3.22.13 talks about installing it and maintaining it. And again, B there, we've added that all irrigation systems should be designed to prevent runoff onto adjacent properties and public rights-of-ways. You would think that would be a no-brainer, but it happens quite a bit. So that one's new. Some of these are what you have already, the landscaped areas kept free of trash and those sorts of things. Certificates of occupancy. This is where it says.
Craig.
Yes, sir?
On 3.22.13, 1A, there's a requirement for an automatic irrigation system. And it refers back to 3.22.5.9, which is the one that allows the hose bibs and does not require it to be an automatic irrigation system. I'd suggest moving the word automatic because it's confusing.
I've got an automatic one. I don't turn it on. I just do it manually. So,
but since
okay. We'll look into that. Yes, sir. Because it does provide for alternative irrigation systems. Landscape irrigation and plan requirements. We've streamlined this a little bit. Probably the most significant item on page 22. Before, you had to have a landscape architect do your plan, and you had to have a licensed irrigator do your plan. We've now opened it up to a licensed irrigator or other qualified professional acceptable to the Director of Community Development or the Chief Building Official or their designees, subject to state licensing statutes. The state has some licensing requirements on certain types of irrigation systems and things, but the ordinance is allowing more flexibility on who does the layout. A sprinkler system could be designed by, the sprinkler installer, provided he's gotten certain certificates.
So is
Yes,
that,
ma'am?
is that for residential? I mean, my husband put in all three of our house sprinkler systems. I'm just curious. An individual that cannot put in their own sprinkler system on a residential property?
Plumbing normally, and I'll need to check with your building official, usually a homeowner can do their own plumbing and their own electrical. But if a professional comes in and does it, they've got to be licensed. So I suspect it may fall in the same category. That a homeowner can do their own sprinkler system, but, you can't just have anybody come in and install one professionally. They've got to have certain certificates and things. I will find out. I don't know the answer to that one. You raise a good question, especially if you only have to have a hose bib. Okay, you have an approved tree list on page 23. I don't profess to be a tree expert, so we took your list. My understanding it wasn't all that bad a list. We could just reference, a Texas A&M list or something similar to that and make it simpler. But at this point, you're the same list you had before, and we'll probably visit with some tree people and see if there's any additional things needed. We have opened the door to as an alternative material, even though it's not on the tree list, if it's water conserving, that is allowed. So any questions about the tree list? Now, we got two different tree lists in here. Actually, before there's about 4 different tree lists. Now we got 2. One is the tree list you can plant. There's another list that's the protected tree list. So if you recall, you got credits for a protected tree. We've kept the protected tree list in here. The protected tree is still voluntary as far as protection, but if you want to get a credit for a protected tree that you saved, then you're going to have to protect it and do some things when you construct. So those 2 lists are still in there. And again, we've added the term voluntary preservation of trees and things in a number of places here. Because it's voluntary preservation of trees, we have removed a lot of language about replacement requirements for protected trees. If you can take down a protected tree voluntarily, it's your choice, then it made no sense to have a replacement section where you got to put it back with a similar kind of tree. That's pretty significant. Now, the old ordinance was supposed to have done that, but you still had all these protected tree replacement credits and all these things in it, even though it's voluntary to begin with. So any questions about those concepts? We've left tree exemptions provided. Again, it's voluntary tree protection, so theoretically, if I don't protect the tree, there's not a downside. But we still have said that these ordinances will not apply to damaged trees, utility companies going in and fixing trees and those sorts of things. I've left highlighted on the page 28 there, homeowners. It used to say that a homeowner was exempt from the requirements of the article unless they were within the Historic Preservation Overlay District, and then they had to get approval of the Historic Preservation Commission to do something with a protected tree. That has been removed here. And again, if it's voluntary protection, I did not have clear direction that that was different in the historic district versus everywhere else. So here's your protected trees identified, 3.22.18, and these are the ones where you get credits for these trees. So they're voluntarily protected, and we make sure they're in the very first sentence that the applicant chooses to voluntarily preserve or protect these trees. They are to be included in the tree conservation plan. The tree conservation plan's it's a little bit later in the ordinance. Before, after you got done with the tree survey and you had a whole bunch of protected trees, then you had to put together a plan on how you're going to protect all those trees. Now we're down to, if you want credits for some of those protected trees, then you got to have a tree protection or conservation plan. The purpose of that plan is much simpler now, and we'll get into that in a second. The tree survey. Your ordinance required a tree survey before. And that was to identify protected trees and make sure that, A, they didn't get knocked down, and B, if they did, that you got enough replacement inches to cover that. So we've now changed that to say a tree survey may be required. And it's got some criteria about when. It's limited to sites located in multifamily, non-residential. Director of Community Development has some criteria in there. But basically, you are identifying protected trees that you will try to get a credit for. Okay. I've actually been involved in a lawsuit where a neighborhood sued us because we didn't require a survey, even though legally they could remove all the trees for a detention pond without having to replace it. There was no required to replace it. So it was basically a tree survey of the trees that couldn't be knocked down, and there's no requirement to replace them. So we said that doesn't make any sense. So we didn't require it. We got sued. We prevailed. It was said and done. They said that if it doesn't make sense, staff has some discretion in that requirement, just like a police officer does on enforcing speed limits. Any question about the tree survey? Oh, and we also allow aerial photographs and things like that, which quite often are pretty handy. Just if you got like 3 protected trees, just get an aerial photograph and make a notation of what those 3 trees are. We left landmark tree in here. Landmark tree is just like a landmark building. It's a historic tree. Something happened there. Somebody got hung, some tree got signed, something. And so that's still in the ordinance verbatim, and we did not touch that. So if it's a landmark tree designated, then you still have to go through the Historic Commission to deal with that. Okay. Now, section 3.22.21. Tree protection, planning, and maintenance requirements. It was very confusing. We've sorted through it all now and picked up all the transplanting, protection, maintenance, tree pruning requirements from numerous different places in those old ordinances. So on page 30, you've got tree planting requirements, and right now there's just the 2. Here's the tree transplanting protection. This is the one that said you only got a credit for transplanting a living tree. And your existing ordinance says if it was from 3 inches to 6 inches. So if you transplanted an 8-inch tree, you got no credit, or a 12-inch tree. So we've changed that. Any tree that's over 6 inches, you get a credit for if you transplant it. But it has to be on the tree list. Any questions on that? And a lot of people are using the tree spades and planting fairly healthy, large trees. It can be done. Then there's the protection requirements, and it was interesting. The protection requirements for voluntarily perceived trees were in strange section. I want to say it was under tree credits. And so if you're going to take an existing tree and get credits for it, it talks about all the things you need to do. You can't store materials under it. You can't park vehicles under it, boring, those sorts of things. But that's only if you're going to get a credit for it. Now, obviously, you got to maintain them. Obviously, if they're dead or they die, this is on page 31 there, number 4. You've got to replace it. They can give you additional time for a better planting season. True pruning requirements. We pulled those from other places in the ordinance. We're making sure that everybody understands it's protected trees that they're going to keep, which is what A does there, protected tree. Obviously, public safety is something that's a visibility problem. Damaged and diseased trees. Here at the city can require the removal of a tree. And at its discretion, they can make the property owner remove the tree if it's in danger of falling, either on the roadway or on a building. This is the 3.22.22, and we're getting close to the end. I'm getting tired of hearing me. 3.22.22 is the tree conservation plan, and it lays out the format and what goes on it. We're still visiting with staff about what the tree conservation plan does, and we may refine this more. Before, it was any protected tree on a property, you had to include it in this. Now it's any protected tree if you're choosing to save it and get a credit for it. It's how you're going to protect it. Page 33, and this 3.22.23 used to have some provisions that the tree conservation plan was only good for 2 years. We struck that. That doesn't make any sense. I mean, if it was good one day, it's good the next. The other thing was the appeals of the Planning and Zoning Commission decision about a tree conservation plan was to the City Council. We struck that. The only tree conservation or trees to be conserved in the plan are the ones that you're trying to get credit for at this point. So again, we're still wrestling with that a little bit. It may be simpler just to have the tree survey and have the standards in here and not require all that. 3.22.25 was a little bit of an issue. In the past, this was aimed at tree planting credit purchases. It was aimed at if you knock down a bunch of trees and you were going to have to replace that number of inches of tree, you could put money into a tree fund. We've left that in here. You may have a developer that for some reason is having trouble planting that number of trees, and they could put money into a tree fund for trees to be planted somewhere else. So we've adapted that a little bit and left it in here. And the tree fund created is the top of 34. That's basically out of your existing ordinance. And then violations and penalties is the legalese that the attorney is going to probably review, but we took it straight from the ordinance. Thank goodness I'm done with that. I'll be glad to answer any questions. It's some pretty radical changes. I think we will do some beta testing on some existing site plans, plus some existing problem children, and see what the effect is.
Can I ask one last question?
Yes, sir.
I should have asked this when you were in the parking area requirements, but how do we compare to other municipalities in the requirement of the number of landscape islands in a parking lot?
At this point, from what I've seen, the number of islands looks pretty comparable. The number of trees required, if it's one per island or whatever, a number of shrubs in an island or whatever, I think looks pretty comparable. I think where the problems are occurring is on existing parking lots that are non-conforming. When someone tries to convert it, it becomes a problem, is where I think we're at. But I hope by the time we come back, we'll have a pretty detailed comparison. The requirements in various cities, I'm not real proud of my profession. I mean, the requirements are all over the place. And I looked at Weatherford the other day, and I'm pretty familiar with their ordinances, and they've amended theirs to, I want to say it's 6 trees per acre of landscaping, or per acre of the project, and which works out to about, I want to say, per 1,000 square feet. It's a real low number. And here it's per 1,000. It's 1 tree per 1,000 square feet of landscaping. So I'm sorry. Is it 6 trees? It's 6 trees per 1,000 square feet of landscaping, not. On 100,000 square feet, if you had to landscape 10%, it's not, 6 trees for 100,000 or 600 trees. It's you take the 10% number, which would be 10,000 square feet, and you got to have the 6 trees per 1,000, so it's 60 trees on 100,000 square feet, which is about 2.5 acres. So, and we're also talking about having some matrices that you can just fill out and real quickly calculate the requirement on various properties. Because somebody's got to do it every time a permit comes in, so I think it'll help expedite things. But it was very confusing before with all the credits for this and credits for that. So, for example, 20% landscaping had this requirement of this many trees, but then you did all these credits over here, so it reduced the amount of landscaping, so it reduced the amount of trees. So we're trying to probably just standardize it more. It's this many trees for this much landscaping, subject to a few credits. But yeah, I think the requirements are actually pretty typical on new construction, especially commercial and retail, except for the 20%. Some places it's 10%, some places I've seen 15, and some places 20. So. Any other questions? And we'll be coming back to you with revisions at your next meeting. The zoning part of this does require a public hearing and notice. So what you'll see as far as the zoning amendment, it'll say, Chapter 8, C, Article 3.22, Chapter 13, C, Article 3.22, and then everything below that is strikeouts. It's all moved over here.
Any other questions for Mr. Farmer or for staff on this issue? If not, well, we will. Thank you, Mr. Farmer.
And we'd love feedback if you want to call staff and give us feedback. Plus, I'll definitely take that. But if there's heartburn, if it's great, provide some feedback. It'll help steer us. So, thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention for the commission, I found an answer to your question on the property owner. If the owner does the irrigation and it is the owner's home, that's an exemption to the administrative code of the Texas state statutes.
Well, I'm glad to know we're not going to prison after 30 years.
I was going to call the irrigation police.
Thank you. Okay. All right, so they've got some going there. I want to step back just a second and while they're visiting and say welcome to our newest P&Z members, Mr. Jim Jones down on my far right. We welcome you and glad you volunteered your time and your services to the city of Granbury. And then, Kira, did you have something you wanted to follow up from the last meeting on the comp plan when you asked for us to have members of a review commission?
Yes, thank you for that reminder, and it's timely before Jeremy gives us our training. I had incorrectly stated that we could have a subcommittee, and in checking with our city attorney, that's not possible due to open meeting requirements. So that's okay, though. We can combine the topic of the comprehensive plan into a plan commission meeting and, give briefings and take your questions during that time as a discussion item.
Thank you. The next item on agenda tonight is a D, orientation and training workshop to be administered by the city attorney. Jeremy?
Do I have to? It's not as exciting as tree islands and parking lots. Craig, I'm sorry. What I have to say is not that enthralling.
Combining these at one meeting has been a little much, but thanks.
So I'll try to keep this down to about an hour and a half or so. How about that? See you, Craig. All right. Yeah, so Kira and the staff said it's that time of year again where we have new members coming onto various boards, and we need to come around and get them some open meetings training and introduce them to some of the things that we need to take care of and watch out for. And so that's what I'm here for today. You guys are, well, first of all, before I get into this, have you guys all met Braden Hunt? Braden is a senior at Granbury High School. He is an intern here with our planning department as part of our ongoing push to make sure we're in compliance with our own strategic plan. One of those big things was interns, and he is an Interact member of our Interact Club here, which is Junior Rotary, and we made the connection with him at an event. He's one of our Interact officers, and we were able to bring him in, and he's been interning for 2.5, 3 weeks now. Going to take off to Texas A&M in the fall and wants to work in planning and development when he grows up. He's a good kid, super good kid. All right, open meetings, 551 local government code says we have to have open meetings, right? That generally goes for councils, commissioners' courts, state legislatures, on and on and on. We're a little bit different in Granbury. I represent a couple of cities, few cities. Here, the policy is that all of the boards and commissions will comply with the same open meetings requirements, all of the same requirements that the city council complies with or has to comply with. So you guys are subject to open meeting, plus, you know, most of what you hear is planning and zoning, a little different than some of the other boards that I've talked to. There are requirements for public hearings and things like that. And so it's really good to have these open meetings. Chuck always gets them on video. I know the council watches these. They'll discuss some things as they're sitting at the dais about, I saw at P&Z this happened and that happened and this was discussed and so on. I did talk to the Historic Preservation Commission a few days ago, end of last week. Same kind of thing as I'm doing with you guys, and one of the questions that they had for me was, you know, why does the council not always do what we recommend? Why does sometimes they do something different? And my response to that is, you're all invited to the meetings. You all have an opportunity to talk. I would impress upon you when there's an issue that you feel strongly about, come to the meetings. Fill out a card, sign up, and speak on it. Just because you're on the commission, you don't lose those citizens' rights to speak, right? And we'll get into some of that later, First Amendment stuff. But please do come to the meetings. You're all encouraged to. They would love to hear from you, not just from the record that we create in these meetings, but in person as well. So please do that. All right, 551 open meetings. You know, we have the standard stuff that we always talk about, that the meetings have to be public. We have to post 72 hours advance notice of the location where it's going to be had. We have to post an agenda. And I'll get into some of that stuff, like accurate agenda postings. There have been a lot of cases recently revolving around exactly that. A lot of First Amendment issues as well. So we know that recently the legislature updated 551-007 that says, look, every citizen has the right to speak on any agenda item. That's why, what is it, number 2 tonight? I don't have an agenda in front of me, but whatever it is. Public comment on agenda items, right? That's mandated from the state. So we can set rules, we can have parameters by which we allow them to speak. They can either speak as we do it here. One time before the meeting, they can sign up and speak on it. or the chair, in this case, has the discretion that during a particular agenda item, they can allow them to speak then if they want. If you watch the council meetings, Mayor Jarrett does it all the time. He'll, especially if it's a pretty contentious issue and the council as a whole really wants to hear from the citizens, and there are a lot of citizens there. Sometimes people sign up and sometimes they don't sign up because maybe they're not great public speakers, or they're concerned about what they're going to say. But as the meeting goes on and we get into that agenda item, sometimes he'll say, okay, does anybody else want to fill out a speaker card and come speak? And so the thing that you don't have to do, though, is you don't have to be subjected to things like fighting words, trash talking, anything that would incite violence. If someone gets up and starts acting a little bit crazy, the chair absolutely can just look at them and say, stop, get out. If you're not talking about a particular agenda item, you're just here to yell and scream at us, oh, you're all a bunch of liars and thieves, right? Well, you don't have to be subjected to that. Then we get into this whole context of, a twist on words, So I can sit here and tell you you're all a bunch of liars and thieves, and you can say, Jeremy, get out. And you would be within your right. I don't have First Amendment right to do that because I'm just here trying to incite mayhem. Now, if I say something like, you're all liars and thieves because when you ran, you said there were never going to be any new taxes. Okay, well, maybe that's different because I'm actually now talking about legitimate public business, right? Business of the council, whatever that may be. So you really have to tweak all that out and decide what's what. The next issue that comes up is city staff speaking, right? If somebody from city staff is talking about a personal interest during an agenda item, that is not protected free speech. They have zero right to talk about their own personal interest during an agenda item, what they think, what they don't think, right? But if they're commenting as a citizen on a public concern, then it is protected. How do you figure that out, right? So you got to tweak through all that and work it out. And by the time you do all that, they've already said what they've had to say, and they've moved on anyway. So then we get to members of the board, and I've actually told the mayor this. I said, if you want to talk about this as a citizen, go fill out one of the cards, come down here and talk about it. You are not precluded. You guys can sit there right now and you can address me and you can talk to me and ask me questions as members of the Planning and Zoning Commission, or you can say, you know what, I want to talk about public business, but I want to talk about it as a citizen. You can fill out a card, come down here and say whatever you want to say and say the rest of you are all crazy. Yeah, we should violate open meetings every week, right? And whatever it may be. But you absolutely have the right to come stand down here at the podium and talk as a citizen. Seems a little crazy to me, but I guess as I'm sitting up there and I'm trying to weigh out the business of the city and what's in the best interest of all of the citizens while complying with the requirements of the law, I might actually want to come down here and speak as a citizen, right? For me, I hope none of the PD guys are listening, but I like to drive fast, right? And so, there may be an item up there, if I were elected, having to do with a speed limit reduction in a certain area of town. And so I'm going to sit up there and think one thing, but I might want to go sign up and come down here and say, man, I think people that have certain driving courses and certain types of experience, I've been through NASCAR training, never had an accident in my life, knock on wood, I should be able to have some sort of an exclusion. You guys need to consider that for all of us, that I'm speaking as a citizen for other citizens. And then I go back up there and I have to put my council hat back on and say, well, the best interest for the community, for the safety, is it close to a school, are we protecting children, et cetera, right? So there is a specific case on this, right? There's a case out of Hayes County recently, and this commissioner, it was in a commissioner's court, he had put on an agenda, and I want to read you exactly what he put on there. He said, you guys know I always bring all this paper and then I just make it up as I go. I don't ever really look at it, but on this one, he said, presentation by Commissioner Molinar, right? That's how it was listed on the agenda. And this goes back to, we have to make sure what we put on the agenda is on the agenda. Just before I started talking, you guys were asking Kira about something, trying to remind her, and she said, oh, city attorney said, we can't do that because we didn't get it on the agenda. We're not allowed to talk about it, right? That's what happened in this case. So he put on the agenda under presentation by himself, under proclamations and presentations, the item that he was going to speak on was the proposed 2026 transportation plan. Perfectly legitimate, right? So he gets up there and he starts talking about the proposed 2026 transportation plan. I'm reading this right out of the case, right? And then he used this presentation as an opportunity to speak, as he had apparently grown tired of being used as a punching bag without an opportunity to speak in defense of his integrity, and he wished to respond to repeated accusations by offering his individual viewpoint by defending himself, as well as county employees and other members of the Commissioners Court by extolling their successes and accomplishments. So some citizens said, man, if I'd known that was going to be on the agenda, I'd have gone down 551-007, filled out a card, and I'd have signed up to speak. That was not properly put on the agenda, nor was it noticed. And the court said, we agree with you. And then they sent it up to the Court of Appeals. And the Court of Appeals said, yeah, we agree. He talked, no one stopped him. The county judge in Hays County didn't stop him as the presiding officer, say, hey, you're not allowed to talk about that. We need to get back on point. You only talk about the 2026 plan. But he did. They got sued. They lost, obviously, all the way up through the Court of Appeals. Now, the most interesting thing about this is when it gets down, it says, the last part of the holding in this case says, the problem with Molinar's remarks is not that he could not make them at all, but rather the location and timing of his comments. Right? You see where I'm going with this? He could have said, I'm talking about the 2026 plan, talk about the 2026 transportation plan. Then when they had open mic, he could have gone down, filled out a form, come to the podium. I'm talking as a citizen. I'm sick and tired of being harassed and blah, 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 whatever you wanted to say, right? And the court seems to think, well, that might have been okay. So you have to be very careful what you say while you're up there, right? We're talking about an agenda item, and I know you guys probably watch the council meetings. If you're not in attendance, you watch them, and you know, you can't see it, but occasionally you hear this kick under the table, and you see the mayor pop. It's just usually me going, Mayor, back on track. We need to get this back on track, you know. Whether it's, you know, the citizens oftentimes think that when they're up here talking that we just get on them and say, hey, you got to stay on track, you know, but it happens at the dais as well all the time. Sometimes I have to say, hey, come back around. Guys, you guys are getting on, so that's not what this agenda item is. Get back here and let's talk about this agenda item. So whatever it is, we need to stay with it. So pretty big case, right? And it's a recent case, and so we've had grumblings from people threatening, you know, we're gonna sue you. You guys violating open meetings. You know, I hear that stuff all the time. They really get upset with executive sessions, right? I just had someone ask me the other day, a very prominent citizen that, you know, I'm not going to say the name, but every one of us in this room knows, approached me and said, hey, there was this agenda item and it was about ABC. And that's what we all thought was going to happen. And then all of a sudden they go, oh, so we got to go in the back and talk to our lawyer. So we go in the back and they come out and there's no discussion, there's no reasoning, there's a motion and a vote, and that's it, and everybody leaves. And I said, yep, that's what happened. And they're like, no, we want to know what happened. And I said, well, it happened in executive session. I have attorney-client privilege with my clients. I can't divulge what I say to them in confidence. But I mean, if they want to tell you, they can tell you. And they were like, what do you mean? They can tell me, but you can't? Yeah. So I give them advice, and I'm not allowed to tell anybody what advice that I gave them. Just like if Earl says, Jeremy, I want you to represent me in a criminal case. I got caught with 5,000 pounds of cocaine, right? He'd just come back from the border. Anyway, that's great. And he tells me the story of how it happened, how he came into all of this, right? I can never say a word to anyone. Now, he can go out and tell everybody in the world, yep, here's what I told my lawyer, this is what happened. And so if somebody comes back to me and they say, well, hey, I heard blah, 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 I just look at them and say, I don't know, whatever, right? And so Earl can't get mad at me. Same thing with the council as a whole, right? I represent the council, so I can't tell them, but I'm like, they can tell you, right? So again, going back to some of this First Amendment stuff, right? You don't lose your First Amendment freedom of speech just because you go into an executive session. I sometimes want to throw this thing through the wall. It just doesn't stop back here. Anyway, you can go into an executive session, and you can come out, and you can go right downstairs, and you can hold a press conference, and you can say every single thing that just happened in an executive session. Now, there's nothing in the law that says you don't get to talk about executive session outside of those doors, right? It's actually just the opposite. You can talk about whatever you want, but we hope that you won't. And, you know, there's a reason that we have certain abilities to discuss things in executive sessions, and that's because it's for the benefit of the citizens, it's for the benefit of the taxpayers in the city as a whole. You know, one of those things could be real property. Let's say we have some sort of economic development opportunity that's going to bring an increased tax base. It's going to bring jobs, sales tax revenue. But in order to get into this, you know, we've got to give something. Maybe it's the land, and we know where there's some land, and it's for sale, and it's at fair market value. And we can work a deal where if we go into executive session, we lay it all out, we show the council the benefits. They say, hey, that's a great idea, right? We send somebody out, they buy the land, they enter a contract with themselves or their assigns, right? So they can later assign it to the city. Because if we go out there and say, you know, we're interested in this land, that $10,000 lot that we wanted to buy is now $400,000 because it's the city and you got deep pockets, and that's what they want to get to, right? So we hope you don't come outside and hold a press conference and say, we're in an economic development agreement and we're going to go buy some land. You know what that's going to do to all the land value? It's going to go crazy, right? Economic development is another thing, right? A lot of people say, well, what happened? What were you talking about in economic development? What they don't understand is sometimes before we even have these conversations, the companies that may be interested in locating to Granbury, they make us sign confidentiality agreements. So in that case, if you come out and you talk about it, you've reached that confidentiality agreement, and you've not only brought liability potentially to the city, but to yourself personally, right? So we can't talk about those things because we've entered into those agreements. And then, of course, you guys all understand attorney-client privilege and why that's protected, right? That's usually having to do with some sort of pending litigation we have going on, or someone's threatened to sue us, and it's something that we need to address. And you know, just like any client, they ask me, what is your strategy? Where are you going to do? What are you planning to, you know, what route are we going to take? Are we going to be firm on this one, or are we going to go to mediate? You know, all of that kind of stuff. And obviously, you want to inform the client, but you don't want them taking that out to the public and telling Joe Smith, here's his entire strategy, what he's going to do. So go get ready to circumvent that, right? So that becomes an issue sometimes, and so, you know, I get it. People say, I want transparent government, right? I agree with that. But sometimes there are things that need to be kept secret, and that's the purpose of executive session, because and it's very limited, and it's set out in the code. It tells us these are the only things you can talk about in executive session, and it must fit in that category, or you come out here and have it. And there have been things in the past where someone says, hey, I want to talk about this in executive session, and I tell them, no, you can't. It's not allowed. And guess what? We don't get to talk about it at all today because it's not on the agenda, and it has to be done. And so the next agenda, you'll see, and I mean, you guys probably well, nobody really will know but me and whoever brought it to me, but we'll come to the next meeting and it'll be on the agenda and there will be a public meeting and people will be able to comment on it. And that kind of stuff happens from time to time. So if we can't make it fit within one of those exceptions, we don't talk about it in the back. We do have a pretty good communications department. They try to put out a lot of information. Chuck makes all these really cool videos all the time that I see on social media, and we love that. But the thing that you guys need to understand, and I have to tell the council this as well, is that the communication department is they don't represent you, and they're not the spokesperson for you. So if you decide to go out and speak to the media about something, you're just talking to a group of people, you need to understand you are always on the record. Whatever you're saying, they're going to bring it back to you. It's going to come back at some point. You remember you said A, B, C, and now you're doing D, F, and the communications guys are going to say, we don't know what anybody's talking about, because what happens is we start getting open records requests, and then they want emails from all of you, between you and city management and staff, and it just goes on and on and on, and there's this repetitive process. So be careful what you say and who you say it to. I get every day, every single day, not almost every day, but every single day, multiple times a day. A council person or the mayor will get asked a question, and somebody's calling me, because that's always their answer. Well, you call the lawyer, call our lawyer. Call him, and he'll help you figure out whatever this is, or what's wrong with this development, or where you need to go next. Every day. If someone comes to you and they ask you a question, make certain that you say, I'm not speaking on behalf of the entire Planning and Zoning Commission. This is my personal opinion, and if you're being recorded and it's used against you later, that was your personal opinion, right? The one last thing is walking quorums. You guys all familiar with a walking quorum? Yeah? I'm seeing lots of head shaking. I'll just briefly, a walking quorum is 3 or more of you discussing business that not only will come before you, but is likely to come before you. Even though you haven't seen it on an agenda, you know that, hey, at some point they're building this place out here, and in order for well, we fixed some platting stuff, but the plat to come through, it has to come through P&Z, so you know it's coming to you, even though it may not come for 6 months, 8 months, a year, however long it takes them to develop, right? So the 3 of you are discussing that, and again, there's a case just a year or 2 ago out of Houston, and there were Harris County, 2 commissioners having a conversation about a construction development that was going on, a commercial development. And during the construction phase, they were trying to sway the people to use certain construction companies. I don't know if there were some kickbacks. That part never got resolved, but some kickbacks or something going on with that. And so one of those commissioners reached out to another one via text message. And so somebody finally caught on to it. They do an investigation. They do open records. They get all their text messages. Law enforcement then ends up doing a subpoena to the cell phone companies, and they get these records, and they show during this time frame all of these allegations that are made. These phone calls are being made. Well, it just so happened that one of the providers, I believe it was AT&T, actually has the text messages still. So they get the text messages and they see the communication, and the 3 of these together, and they knew that this project was going to be coming before them at a future meeting. They didn't know exactly when, but they knew it was coming, and they created a walking quorum and tried to make an ultimate determination of where this project was going before it was ever brought to the dais, right? And so they were convicted of Class A misdemeanors, put on probation, and 2 of them were removed. One, he stayed and took lesser because he cooperated, but so, you know, be careful. And you might think, well, you know, Rita Kay may say, I'm just going to talk to Earl about it. It's harmless. Just Earl and I are going to talk. And then Earl decides, well, I'm going to talk to Richard about this. I'm leaving her out, but I'm going to talk. Well, that communication has already happened. Now you created the walking quorum. And so The thing that you get into that, with that too, is if someone suspects that, if someone thinks that, and there's enough evidence to support that allegation as they talk to other people involved in these specific developments, now you've subjected all of your personal devices, your cell phones, your laptops, your iPads, all of that stuff to a police investigation. So they're going to get all your personal information, your text messages to your wife and kids, photos, whatever's there, right? They're just going to go have a field day going through all of that stuff. Do forensic dumping on your phone, all the stuff you thought you deleted. HSI can recover that. They have the software to recover deleted photos, videos, audio clips. They're going to get it all anyway. Seems like a long way to go for some of this stuff. Sometimes I even think to myself, that's never going to happen. And then I read these cases that I just went over with you, and I'm like, well, it does happen, right? You know, we're talking about Harris County, huge projects, right? This is like a $8-9 million project. In the grand scheme of what they do in Harris County and how big it is, that's nothing, right? $8-9 million. Yeah, it's a lot of money, but not for a huge project like that. But they went after them. And then the Open Meetings Act, all it takes is a citizen to file a lawsuit, and they won. They proved it up. It was a pretty easy case to prove up. You didn't put that on the agenda. You discussed it. I was not given the opportunity under the law to come in and voice my opinion as to it. I wasn't allowed to participate in public comment because you didn't put it on the agenda, so you're guilty. You want me to pull a Craig and keep going, or... You don't ask questions. I think most of us have been over this before. Got a couple of, we got some new members, I guess, but most all of you have heard this spiel. I think they're ready to go, Kira. And Chuck has breached my contract today. My contract says that I'm not to appear on camera, and he's got it pointing right at me, so. More city issues.
Jeremy, I do have a question.
Sure.
If we're talking and I'm getting real uncomfortable the way the conversation's going back and forth, can I go to Madam Chair and say, can we go into executive session?
So you're going to go into executive session pursuant to what?
I want to get a legal opinion. Maybe I think that we're getting in a gray area or something like that. Can a board member ask to go in executive session?
You can.
Okay.
Well, you
For
can,
consultation
but-
with attorney, that's the only, like, even if I'm not here, I'm the only person that can appear via telephone. And the only time you can say I want to take an executive session would be to consult with your lawyer if it's not on your agenda. Now, you can ask for it, but it may or may not get granted. And what you're comfortable with or not comfortable with, I think maybe just the best thing at that point, I don't know that you need to consult with your lawyer about, what somebody may or may not be saying. You just voice, hey, I don't feel comfortable with this conversation. Make a record. We have a video process here. Just make a record. I think this is violating open meetings. They're talking about things not on the agenda, just putting it out there, and then hopefully someone says, oh, yeah, you know what, you're right. Yeah, let's bring this back to where we need to be. Let's get back onto the agenda item and continue to discuss it. That it?
Anything else, commission members, for Mr. Sorelli?
So the other thing I want to talk, no, I'm kidding.
Okay, if there's no further business, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you all for coming. Good night.